Okay, so what I'm going to talk about in this video is how to do some direct manipulation stuff. And so manipulating is one of the 4 interaction types, and basically the way we think about it is instead of typing commands, you actually change something. So that can be dragging and dropping or resizing a picture or things that are more complicated than that. What we're going to focus on is, like the web page says here, how to drag a picture with VB. As far as the URL for this, I'm going to show it briefly here on the screen. It's ada.ius.edu/i300 and then /p=87. So the starting point for this, like it says right here, is we're going to use an image viewer project, which I talked about just a little bit ago in a different video. And so I've already gone through these steps right here, and I've tested it. I have made the new project. What I have on it is a tiny picture box. That's the thing that we're going to drag around. I used an open file dialog, like we've seen how to do, to open it and make the picture appear in there. The only other thing I really have going on, which it says right here, is that initially the picture box has a visible property set to false, and so when the dialog completes and we have a file, then the picture is shown to be visible, so that gets set to true then at that point. So to show you what's going on with that, here we have Visual Studio. If I look at the design view, we just have a window, the pull down menu, a picture box on it, and then down here we have the things that aren't necessarily anchored anywhere else, the file dialog, and then also I've put a timer down because that's what we're going to need to do the direct manipulation part. So to see the code now, just very quickly, we'll recognize this is the code that we've already seen. Show the dialog. If we get a good result, and then we're going to put the picture that we got into the image property of our picture box. After that, we make it visible. The only thing I show here how to do that we haven't seen already is to set the size mode in code before we were using the property editor for that. So very quickly, I'll run it with start. So I have my 2 things in the file menu. I'll open. I'll pick a nice record. So now we have a tiny little picture appears. What we want to be able to do is we want to make it so that we can drag it around and have this thing work. So going back to the post, basically what I'm doing is providing some commentary about stuff you can already read. The way we're going to approach drag and drop is that it's not something that Visual Basic is going to have a ready-made solution for us to use, although it actually does for some things, just not for quite the way we're using it. And because it's a good logic and programming exercise, we're going to recognize what we've already talked about, that a click event has 2 parts to it, the mouse down and then the mouse up. So when the person pushes the mouse button down, the click event doesn't fire until the mouse button goes back up. Is that second part that actually means that the click is finished. So we can take advantage of the fact that .NET gives us these different events, one for the mouse going down, one for the mouse going up, and so we can recognize if the mouse goes down on top of the picture, then that means the user might start dragging it, and then when the mouse goes up over the picture, the user might be done dragging it. So we're going to have 2 different events for the picture, and then in between there we'll say, okay, the user pushed the mouse down over the picture, and so we'll basically keep checking until the mouse is lifted up over the picture. So what we're going to need is we're going to need to know that the user pushed the mouse down over the picture or not. And so we're going to use a Boolean variable for that. And so I've scrolled down on the web page to show some of the code we're going to use. And so we're going to use a flag that basically tells us whether or not the user has pushed the mouse button down or not. And we haven't seen this before, so to make a variable in Visual Basic, there's a statement called dim, and then we're going to name the variable, and then we use as, and then it's type, so Boolean, and then we can also initialize it. So I've copied the code that's highlighted. I'm going to paste that into Visual Studio. And so where that goes in our code file. It's part of the class, and we're initializing variables, so we'd want to put that at the top of the class. So I just put that here as the first line. So now what I need is for my picture box, I'm going to need the mouse down and the mouse up event. We can't get those by double clicking on the picture box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select picture box from the drop down on the left, and then I'm going to look at all the events, and I'm going to see, okay, I scroll down, there's a mouse down event. So now I have the mouse down event I need. I'm going to do the same thing, select picture box again, and this time I'm going to make the mouse up event. So now we have something that will fire whenever the mouse button is pushed down only on top of the picture box, and then an event that will fire when the mouse button is lifted up on top of the picture box. So the way we think of that is mouse button down on the picture box, the user moves the mouse around, then lifts it up. That's what a drag is going to be. So it's one user action in terms of dragging, but in terms of the code, it's something that starts with one event handler, ends with another. And so what we want to do right now is we just want to set the flag. So this is a true false, and it tells us we set it to true. I can't type. Twice I can't type. We set it to true in the mouse down event, and then we set it to false in the mouse up event. So what we have right now is something that if we run this program, the user pushes the mouse down on the picture, our flag becomes true. When they lift the mouse up again on the picture, the flag becomes false. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to let us drag the picture. So we're going to have to do some other stuff to actually make the drag part happen. And so our strategy is going to be that if we think about, well, let me illustrate this by running the program. So if we think about this being the picture here, and it's invisible right now, so we can't see it, we have to imagine a little bit. As soon as the user pushes down on the mouse, this flag gets set to true. And so now if I want to drag the picture around, and then I lift my mouse button, the flag gets set to false. So dragging a picture means that it has to follow the mouse across the screen. So what we do is we change where the picture is located based on how the mouse is moving. That's how dragging and dropping gets implemented. And we do that as long as the mouse button is down, as long as this flag is set to true. And then when this flag is set to false, we stop doing that. So we actually have something that complicated that has to happen between these two events. And so the way we make that work is as soon as this happens, we're going to start a timer running. And then while the timer's running, we'll update the location of the picture based on how the mouse is moving. So that's the basic idea. We've seen with our timer events that we can start a timer and we can stop it. Remember, I've already created the timer, so I have that as my starting point. So when the mouse gets pressed down, I can start it. When the mouse is lifted up, I can stop the timer. So that's our basic idea. The other thing I'm going to need to do, and I have it on the blog here in the sample code, is I'm going to need to know the location that the mouse is at. And so because of that, I'm going to have a second variable that I keep track of. I'm going to want to know what point I was at. I'm going to call that the original point. The mouse is going to move, and then I'm going to have to move the picture to that point. So basically the way I'm going to think about this is we're going to have a timer that's tick-tocking. It starts as soon as the user pushes the mouse down on the picture, and then the last time that happened, we're going to know where the picture was, and then we'll see, okay, where is the mouse? Has it moved somewhere? And if it has, we're going to move the picture to the new place. So it's kind of like a game of leapfrog. The mouse starts somewhere, we see where that is, the mouse moves somewhere, and then we slide the picture based on how the mouse has moved. And so it all starts out with keeping track of the thing here that's called a ridge point. So at the top, I'm going to have two variables in this program, the mouse down and the ridge point one. Oops, I am not doing well with typing today. So what's going on here, this is worth talking about a little bit because we haven't done actually too much programming. It's all been kind of widget driven. that this is an event handler where the mouse gets pressed down. The reason we let Visual Studio create this for us is because we don't want to have to know the details of how to actually set all these arguments and everything, or to use additional syntax for an event handler. But what happens is a function that gets called that accepts a special kind of argument here. It's named E and its type is mouse event args. So that has a bunch of stuff in it, a bunch of information that as programmers we have access to. But what we want to know in particular is the location. Where on the screen was the mouse pressed down, or the mouse button down. And so we store that. It's a location on the screen, so it's going to be 2 coordinates, X and Y, horizontal and vertical. And we're going to store that in a variable called a ridge point. So if we look at the code now, I'm going to copy this last one right here. And if you'll notice, there's nothing about the timer in here yet. That hasn't been introduced in the blog yet. In terms of talking about it, I brought in the timer early. We've already started and stopped it in our events, even though it's not shown up in the blog yet. So then in the mouse up handler, what it does, the timer's going to stop, and then we put some other code in. So this is actually doing some arithmetic with picture locations. So what it does here is it's going to set the location of the picture box to a new value. So it has an original value when the mouse is pressed down. When the mouse is lifted up, we're going to change that value. So what it's set to right here is its location, and then we're going to add something to it. So the way we think about adding points in computer graphics is it's basically shifting coordinates, sliding something around. What we're going to add to it is the location here. Notice what this is. This is the location of the mouse when it's lifted up. So this is where the mouse ended up at. And we're going to add to it the difference between the current location and where the mouse started. So basically we're going to slide the picture around. So if I test this by running it, I'm going to have to open up. I exited, so that's great. Apparently that worked. Maybe I didn't hit what I thought. So in this case, the mouse goes down, I move the mouse, and then I lift it up, and then the picture snaps to where I am. So that's what this arithmetic is illustrating, that it basically works. If we have a picture following a mouse, it does the right thing. The problem is, I can do all kinds of complicated stuff, like trace out fancy spirals and stuff, and the picture's not moving around with me. Or in other words, the user's not getting enough feedback to know what's actually going on. And there's nothing signifying to the user that they can drag the picture. So we need to do something about it. That's why we have the timer, so that the timer can click, and we can do this incrementally. We can say follow the mouse while it's pressed down. We don't have to do it all at once at the end. So the first thing we want to do is we want to give something to the user to signify that this thing is draggable. So we're going to add a third variable. It's a cursor. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the cursor when the mouse is over the picture. So I'm going to add that to my project. I'm making a new variable, so it's going to go up here at the top. So things are getting more complicated in terms of what we have. In the mouse down, I'm going to change the cursor. And we're going to consistently refine this. So this is just kind of step-by-step stuff. So I have a variable, and basically what it does is it's going to hold my old cursor. And notice that a picture box has a cursor property. So when the mouse is in the picture box, it's going to look like whatever the cursor property says. And so we're going to set it to a special thing, cursors.hand. Now basically what we want to do is then when the mouse is lifted up, when the user is done dragging, we can in some sense undo that. And so that's the reason we have the original cursor variable, is that when we're done, we can set the cursor back to what it used to be. So now we have something. When I put the mouse down, it turns into a hand. when I lift the mouse up, it stops being a hand. We may think that's a little bit not enough. What we need is as soon as we enter the picture, it needs to turn into a hand to signify to the user that the picture is draggable. And so that's actually doable. We can bring in more events. And so what I want to do for the picture box is not use a mouse down event, but this other one, mouse enter. And so what we do, then this is an event that fires when the user, when the mouse cursor actually enters the area on the screen that the picture box has. So if I want to test that out with the new event, well, first I got to open a picture to make it work. So now, as soon as the mouse enters, we have something that signifies it's draggable. So this actually works pretty nice now. Maybe this is what we should stick with. So this was basically just a little experiment, and from it I'm going to conclude that the mouse enter event's the way to go. That's actually not something that's in the blog post, I believe, but I think everybody can follow a little bit of a change like that. So the good thing about this is now we're not storing the original cursor anymore. We're just using the mouse enter event to handle that stuff for us. So now what we want to do is we want to get the timer working so the user actually gets some good feedback. So we've already seen that timers need to be start and stopped and that they have an interval. So I'm going to copy the interval setting code here where it's set equal to 1,000. I'm going to draw attention to this other code right here. This is what we're going to need in a second. That's going to go in the tick event for the timer. So I've got to, when I go back to Visual Studio, I have to do a couple things. When the mouse gets pressed down, we start the timer. And so I'll set the timer's interval here when we start it. We need a tick event for the timers. That's the second thing I have to do right now. So I'm going to select the timer from the drop down on the left. Then I'll find the tick event, and not too many to choose from, so it's easy to do. Then back here to get our code. I'll talk about it in a second. That's going to go in the tick event, assuming, well, apparently I cannot copy and paste very well, so let me try it one more time. So that goes in the tick event. If we look at what's going on here, it's updating the location of the picture box just like it was before. The only thing going on is now that we're doing stuff that's a little bit incremental, the timer tick gets a different kind of object sent to it than the mouse events. The mouse events were very convenient because they had a location property that worked. This one is a different thing. It's just general event args. In other words, the Visual Studio people are thinking, or the Windows people are thinking, why would a timer tick need to know about specific mouse stuff? And so we have to do a little more work to find out where the mouse actually is. And so this is what that thing does. We have a point to client function, which I won't really get into too much. You can look it up if you're curious. We can give it a special thing called the mouse position, and it basically computes the same thing we had before, where the mouse is on the screen. So we shift the picture box. The only thing we want to do differently in this case is we want to recognize the timer's ticking. So we're going to shift the picture box just to where the mouse is, and then the next time the timer ticks, we have to shift the picture box again. So we have to keep updating original point. And so that's what we do right here. So basically shift the picture, record where the picture is, and then the next time the timer ticks, if the mouse is moved, the picture will get shifted again. So if we test it out, okay, let's see, what did I did wrong? I'm still using original cursor. I don't need it anymore, so I should have deleted that. So now we're in business, have something running, open up a picture. And so I haven't lifted the mouse up. You can see the picture follow me around the screen right now. The only bad thing is it's not very rapid feedback. It's not very incremental. That's because of the timer interval. I set it equal to 1,000. Remember, that's something in milliseconds. So this is saying tick once a second. If I make it 10 times faster, that's pretty good. Maybe still not smooth enough. That's something we can experiment with. We can change the interval and try to get the best value. What we don't want to do is make it too small, because then the timer will always be ticking, and then it actually makes our application not responsive enough, because it's always trying to update where the picture is. That actually illustrates something important about programming direct manipulation. It can be kind of CPU intensive. In this day and age, that's not too big a deal. Several years ago, it used to be a big deal, but it is something that if we're not aware of it, we can do a bad job of programming, and then we actually make an application that's less responsive and less usable. So with that, we're done. If you have any questions, send me an email.